Hello again. The Practical Animal channel is dedicated to the public understanding of conservation. It does this by uploading interviews with conservationists from around the globe. These are their stories. Each video shows what they do and highlights their skill set. My guest discusses knowledge gaps and suggests solutions. Today, we stay in the UK to join my next guest. Andrea Dempsey is Programme Manager for the NGO West African Primate Conservation Action. An expert on West African monkeys, Andrea lists jobs with primates, what their conservation involves, and calls for potential primatologists to identify knowledge gaps in order to make a difference in primatology. You won't want to miss this one. Andrea, what jobs are there with primates?
You could work in a zoo, probably being the most obvious as a zookeeper, working with primates. A researcher, so collecting data either on captive populations or wild populations. And of course, you can work in conservation, so trying to protect the primates in the wild.
Andrea, what do you do, please?
I am Programme Manager for the West African Primate Conservation Action.
What does it involve, Andrea?
Before I had this job, I was country coordinator, so that involved me living in Ghana for 4 years, managing the NGO, which is a non-government organisation, which is kind of like a charity. And you have to make sure that you've got enough funding, so you have to manage all your funding, enough staff, strategise the best way to protect the primates you're there to protect. After the 4 years, I became Programme Manager, and that meant me living in the UK again and travelling backwards and forwards from Ghana, but with a fantastic team in situ and managing the different elements of the work that we do themselves.
What's your best primate fact, please, Andrea?
I always like this one because it's quite simple and straightforward, but people always, and it's kind of my bugbear, because people, they'll see a picture of a chimpanzee and they'll call it a monkey, or they'll see a gorilla and they call it a monkey, which it isn't, it's an ape. And the really easy way to remember between monkey and ape is tail and no tail. So if it has a tail, it's a monkey, and if it doesn't have a tail, it's an ape. And you have to be careful because there's those tricksy macaques out there and they have really tiny little tails, but there's still a tail. So that's my easy, simple fact, but it's a good one.
What species does your work involve?
So we're based in West Africa and we focus on monkeys. The main one is the white-necked mangabey, which is endangered, the rollaway monkey, which is critically endangered, as is the black and white thighed colobus. We also have started work with the Diana monkey and the patas monkey.
How would you describe monkey conservation in West Africa today, Andrea?
It's very holistic, and that's the way conservation should be. So you can't just focus on the monkeys and go, that's all we're going to do, we're just going to protect them. You have to consider the context in which they're living, and that means the people that live with them and surround the forest area. And you can't try and protect the primates without recognizing the needs of the people, because the people that live there, they're essentially trying to just, as we all are, survive, feed our families, and you can't just put a big fence around a forest and say, well, you can't do that anymore. You have to look at alternatives or promote what they're already doing. So that's really how we approach our conservation, in that holistic and sustainable manner. But that is obviously being across the globe, and which also includes the one plan approach, which is people from inside and outside the range of whatever species you're focusing on, all taking some sense of responsibility. And that's from the children up to the government to people that are in other countries working in zoos and conservation organisations.
You're the second person actually that I've spoken to have mentioned the one planet approach. Is that a new idea in conservation?
It's from the Conservation Specialist Planning Group. They kind of coined this one plan approach. It's because historically lots of top-heavy legislation and government rulings and all things just haven't worked. They've just failed time after time. So they've had to really look at how we do this and almost take this bottom-up approach, but pulling in everybody. The planet is in peril and we all need to do our bit. And I think often if you don't live in that country, it's difficult to get that tangible, meaningful impact. But there's a lot you can do no matter where you are. We can all take responsibility of how this planet ends up in the future.
Andrea, how do you see conservation of monkeys in West Africa particularly changing over the next 10 years? And how do you see the interaction with the role of zoos in that conservation?
For the conservation itself, I think there needs to be a huge awakening or turning point from the corporate sector, from governments, and from people that are buying natural resources, be it lumber, be it palm oil, be it coconuts, be it cocoa oil, minerals, gas, gold. If that isn't reduced or regulated, there is no conservation of the planet. There'll be no habitats left. So they really need to, because we all can do our bit, and it's not that we can't do our bit, and demand as a consumer can really change, but we need to do it in the right way. So we need to make sure how we get our produce is sustainable. And I think big companies, big organizations and governments really need to change that. So the role of zoos is critical, really, from a very baseline financial situation. Money that people pay to buy tickets to come to see animals in the zoo goes out to their wild counterparts. So for WAPCA example, if it wasn't for zoos, European zoos, Heidelberg Zoo in particular, who is our mothership, we wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be doing this conservation. But there's many more roles that they play. Research. Some of these animals, particularly the primates we work with, are very elusive. They've been overhunted, so they're not habituated. We don't want to habituate them because that puts them in danger. But we need to know how they are physiologically, biologically, anatomically, dietary, all these things. So we can learn that from our captive counterparts. And of course, the education side. We all remember going to the zoos for the first time, and we believe at WAPCA certainly, if you love something, if you will care for it and you will protect it. And zoos, from the old image of just being bars and concrete, we're a million miles away from that. The zookeepers that look after those animals, that's their absolute passion and dedicated, and all they care about is those animals more than their families sometimes. And we've really developed those welfare skills, husbandry skills, dietary skills. So without zoos, a lot of more animals will have gone extinct in the wild because of if zoos hadn't intervened. And of course, they're an insurance population. Should the worst happen and these species go extinct, we still have some sort of genetic material that we could look to clone or reproduce, and when it's appropriate, potentially put back into the wild.
Why is conservation of primates, particularly West African primates, important?
It's really important because we're an ecosystem. You know, we all have our part to play on this planet, and primates in particular are seed dispersers, so they eat the seeds of the fruits and then they go to the toilet and then they regenerate the forests. And we all know we need trees for oxygen, to breathe. So we're not here as in isolation. We all need each other, and primates play that role. But for West Africa in particular, as you may remember it was called the Gold Coast. There's gold there, there's oil there, there's lumber there. And as I was saying, that has just been taken and taken and taken. And now we're at a point where the forests are fragmented, there's mining, and they can't roam across Africa as they once did. So they get bottlenecked into different populations, and then that causes issues. And then overhunting. West Africans hunt meat as we eat meat, exactly the same, but it's that beyond subsistence hunting, commercial hunting, large amount of animals being shipped out of Africa. Actually, we find studies where, tons is being turned up at Charles de Gaulle Airport. So it's these sort of things we need to tackle, as well as appreciating the culture in which those things happen.
Andrea, what skills do you need to work with primates? And do those skills differ depending on whether you're a zookeeper or working in the field?
I was a zookeeper before I did this. It's not something that you can learn from a book. You either remember to close padlocks or you don't. And if you don't, then you're not going to last very long as a zookeeper. But obviously, when you're working as a zookeeper, you're much more in close contact with the animals that you care for, be it through caring for them and training them. When you work in conservation, especially if you're working with a species that is incredibly rare, you might never see them in the wild. Particularly in West Africa, it's coined the empty forest syndrome because the forests are really depleted of animals. So seeing the wild ones, you might not ever see them or see them very infrequently, compared to if you work at a zoo and you build a relationship up with the animal that you care for. It's equally hard work, but in different ways. It's physically quite demanding to work in a zoo. If going out doing field surveys, it's very physically demanding as well. So there are similarities, but I guess the overarching similarity is the passion. You have to have a passion for wanting to protect these animals, be it in a zoo or be it in the field, because you're not in it for the money, that's for sure, because that's another similarity. There ain't no money in this game whatsoever. But if you're in it for the money, then you're in it for the wrong reasons. I think both zookeeping and perhaps conservation, people have a bit of an ideology of what that looks like, and they think you're going to be cuddling monkeys all the time. You don't, because they smell mainly, but they also bite. So it's not that. I mean, if you're working in a rescue centre or sanctuary, then there might be more hands-on, but working in a zoo and certainly working in the field, you don't have that same contact.
Andrea, working with monkeys in a zoo environment, are there certain annual or seasonal routines that you have to follow?
Well, you have to be inspected by the zoo, by BIAZA and by EAZA if you're a member of them. And that means that you are keeping your animals in appropriate facilities with the appropriate husbandry, veterinary care, and biosecurity as well. As we know, primates and humans are very closely linked, so we can share the same diseases. So we need to make sure that we're not contracting or they're not contracting any diseases that we might pass on to them. So certainly that's kind of an annual event or every 2 years for your inspection. But depending on what primate species you're working with, there may be reproductive aspects that are more seasonal. For the monkeys I work with, that's not the case. But you might see sort of patterns in terms of when they get pregnant. Tends to be when it would be rainy season, so there's abundance of food and things like that. So that's kind of when you might have to look at your annual fluctuations.
Are there any behaviours that you try and train into your monkeys at the zoo? Is there anything that you can train them to do that helps with their veterinary care, for example?
Yeah, training primates is really important because it helps us reduce the stress of if there needs to be a veterinary intervention, or if we need to move them, or if we need to weigh them. So we really promote positive reinforcement training. And what we've done at WAPCA, we train all our animals to go into a box. So we're part of the breeding program, the global breeding program. So from time to time, we need to box them and transfer them. So our monkeys are trained to sit in a box through positive reinforcement. We've also had a monkey trained to present its rear and actually received, we did that with 2 monkeys, a hand injection to give them an anesthetic for a health check and to move them. And what that does is particularly rewarding, because if you try and catch a monkey in a net or race it into a box, the adrenaline starts kicking in, and adrenaline works as an antidote to anesthetic. So once you get the monkey, you have to give an anesthetic, stays awake, doesn't fall asleep, then you have to give another one, and then you risk overdosing. But through training, they don't know anything about it. They present their bum, they get a bit of banana, present their bum, boom, the next one, it's injection, and they go to sleep. And I remember the first time when I was working as a zookeeper, I did a hand injection for an anesthetic, and I thought, oh, it'll take ages for the effects of the anesthesia to take hold. But because there was no adrenaline, it happened straight away, and I just had this thud. I was like, oh, he's already asleep. And it was just brilliant. And the next day, and it happened with the mangabes as well, the next day, they come and train going, yeah, this is no problem. And it's possibly, I think, the most rewarding part of working with animals if you get that training in. And as I say, our mutual friend, she's absolutely amazing at training and has changed really how we work with our animals so that they enjoy it. But it also isn't so dangerous. You don't have to go in with the animals. And we can do, basic, health checks. We can do mouth. Mangabes have very large canines, so they can do mouth. And we did have a particular mangabe that used to steal things from the public. So we used to try and do an exchange for whatever he had. It was normally a mobile phone. for something else, but we could never quite work that training because once he knew that this was the thing he wanted, he was like, oh, you want this? Nah, that's not happening. And that was the only thing we could never train. But we trained a monkey to take insulin injections, which just used to come in, present a bum. She used to have 2 injections a day because she was diabetic, test her urine. It's still good for keepers to have the skills of how to net a monkey, how to restrain a monkey safely, because you never know what's going to happen. There's always going to be circumstances where the animal gets out or something like that. But if we can train the animal first, target train it, and I have a fantastic member of my team, Foster, who's just wasn't a keeper before. He actually got his degree in mathematics, but he just has this amazing intuition with the monkeys. And the training he's done with our monkeys out in Ghana, from box training them, hand injection training them, he's just brilliant. Yeah, he's really got this. You just have to, really interpret what the animal's doing, be really, consistent with what you're asking from the animal. And it's all down to timing and making sure that they get the reward at the right point. And he just has this brilliant kind of persona for it. He's fantastic.
Are you involved with captive breeding and rehabilitation?
So my involvement for captive breeding and rehab is in Accra. We have the Endangered Primate Breeding Centre, and that's where we take in unfortunately some people like to keep monkeys as pets, and it's completely inappropriate and very detrimental to the primate's psychological well-being. And what happens is they generally get the monkey when they're small and tiny and cute, and then they grow up and they've got huge teeth and smell, and then they decide that actually this wasn't such a good idea. And it's illegal to hold mangabes in particular. So we confiscate them. And depending on the age we get them, depends on how much work we need to put into socializing them. Monkeys are incredibly sociable animals like humans. Some things are nature, some things are nurture, and they almost need to learn the social etiquette of being a monkey. So we'd spend some time with them, introducing them to a one-on-one to, quite a placid animal, and then trying to put them into a social group. And that's what we've done there, and built up this centre in Accra, which now has 4 breeding groups of mangabes, 25 animals in total, and then other groups up in Kumasi. But also on the zoo side, in a European scale, I'm the vice chair of the Afro-Eurasian Monkey TAG, which is the Taxon Advisory Group. So me and my colleague Tjerk, we oversee all the European and African and Eurasian monkeys that are kept in European zoos. And then for the Diana monkey, I'm their stubbook. So I focus in on that species and manage them genetically.
What does that involve, Andrea, managing the stud book for the Diana monkey?
It's what you're trying to do basically is matchmake, for a better word, but trying to keep your genetic diversity as much as you can so that your population will keep breeding, and we try and project into 100 years. And so you don't want to start, you can breed with monkeys, you can breed up to cousin level, but after that you don't want to breed because of all the implications that will have. So when an animal is born in a zoo and it gets to sexual maturity, the zoo will let me know, okay, we have this animal, we need to, it's either a male and in with its mum, or it's a female in with its dad, and ideally move it on. And so I will look for the best match based on their mean kinship, how related they are to each other, and you try and keep that as far away as possible. Particularly with the Diana monkeys, however, they're quite female orientated, and we try and keep the females together and move the male. Mangabes, you can stick a whole load of unrelated females together in a male and they kind of sort it out. Gwenons, it's not that easy, and they can be quite fussy with who they want to hang out with. So we try and keep the females together and move the males off. So it's basically doing that, and it's an international stud book. So I have colleagues in America and Asia, and where we can, where it's most effective, we try and also look at transfers there. But it's not just about genetics. You have to take into consideration the welfare, the age. You don't want to be moving a 20+ female that's never bred anyway across the world. You have to really look at the whole effect of that animal's life history and how that fits best for them as well. It can be difficult if you need to move on animals that you don't have space for, but you can obviously put them onto contraception or hold bachelor groups if that's appropriate. So there's ways and means of getting getting around it. But you need to know about your species as well, because collections will ask you questions regarding behaviour. And so, but you'll have a species committee as well that you can refer to. I have a really good species committee that have done a lot of introductions. We have reproduction, contraceptive advisors, we have vet advisors. There's a good network of people that you can reach out to. Zoos really are conservation organisations. We would all prefer zoos not to exist and all the animals be in healthy populations, but that's not the case. So we need zoos, and they have a role to play in how this planet looks. And yes, it's a money-making entity, so they've got to look at the visitor experience and bringing people in and having entertainment, but it's so much more than that now. And I find people that anti-zoo people haven't been to a zoo in 30-40 years, and you're going, well, your memory of a zoo is completely outdated, and it's still bad zoos, that's also true. But if you look for accredited zoos that are EASA, they've passed an inspection, and that's what you should be looking at when you're looking for your zoo. Do your investigation, do they support conservation? And now it's mandatory for EASA zoos to be supporting conservation.
Andrea, for somebody in their formative years watching this, considering their future, considering their options, do you need a degree to work with monkeys?
Yes and no. I think it's a much more competitive industry than when I started, and people are asking for a degree in a relevant subject. So you can't learn how to be a zookeeper. You either have that affinity with the animals and be able to read animals, and that sounds a bit pretentious, but you see people that aren't good with animals. If you want to really get into conservation, you look more for people that have got a master's degree. And then if you really want to get into more field biology research, then you go the PhD level. But at the same time, if you don't have a degree, go and get experience. If you get experience in a zoo, that can equally look good on your CV, because it shows that you have a real understanding of what the job entails, and it's not this Disney ideological, cuddling monkeys kind of scenario. You've got that knowledge.
Andrea, can you please describe how your own career developed?
I wasn't very academic at school. I left school with no GCSEs. My dad worked in the film industry as a model maker, so I thought I would go down that road. So I started studying media studies at college, onto university, and working on films in between. But then also started working at the Edinburgh Festival, the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, working for comedians. And once I graduated, I kind of had a mixed career of working on films and being tour managers and techies for comics. So it was and it was a brilliant job. Traveled the world, worked with some fantastic people. I always had this primate passion. Whenever I could, I would be watching something about primates, reading something about primates. When I was really young, I had like a VHS copy of a Jane Goodall documentary, and I'd watch that, and in that she'd be in Gombe and she'd eat a cold tin of baked beans, and I used to get a cold tin of baked beans and eat them at the same time. It's slightly odd now looking back on reflection. I went on the website at London Zoo and could see you could volunteer as a zookeeper. So I phoned up and went in and had a very brief meeting, and I started volunteering every Sunday, come rain or shine. I was in there working with on the Mammal South section, as it was then, so monkeys, hoofstock, apes, big cats, and they said they took on extra staff in the summer. At the time, I went and spoke to the operations manager. I guess he asked me 3 questions. Will you work the weekend? Will you work anywhere? And I said yes to all. They said, just say yes to everything he says. And I was like, okay. Did a summer position, and then in April, they offered me a full-time job. So I was there as a keeper, working through the ranks to senior keeper for 10 years. The mangabees had come into London. I got really involved with them as a species, hand-reared one. So I really wanted to do more in terms of conservation. So did my master's part-time, so worked and did my master's, which was quite tough. But then literally as I handed in my thesis, the country coordinator left WAPCA, and I just went, that's a bit serendipity, and applied for the job, and the rest is history, as they say.
What advice can you offer people, Andrea, wanting to work with monkeys?
Volunteer. And if you find something that's a bit of an underdog, a bit of an unknown, you can make it your own special project. Maybe try and find something that nobody else wants to work with, and champion that, and that's how you kind of make your little groove in this world.
Can you suggest an area of research for potential researchers to look at.
Or what I always think with research is, tell me something I don't know. Go to the project and ask what they need to know. What is useful? Speak to the organisation, speak to the specialist group, speak to the people on the ground and find out what is useful. What do you need to know? And then you can statistically prove it or disprove it.
Andrea, is there anything you'd like to add?
Sometimes when we talk about conservation, it's all doom and gloom, but there's still optimism out there. There's still a chance. If we act now, if we change the way we live, how governments run countries, how organizations source their produce, we can turn it around. But we haven't got much time and we need to do it now. And you don't have to look to Ghana, to Africa, to Asia to affect the way the future of this planet is. Native conservation is just as important as the elephants and the apes and the monkeys, hedgehogs, bees, butterflies, swifts, badgers. You can have tangible effect by the way you literally live your life as well as a consumer.
Andrea, thank you very much for your time being on the Practical Animal channel. Andrea Dempsey.
Thank you very much.